all of you for coming out tonight. This is the Dictionary of Marx. This is a 3-ring extravaganza. First ring is out there in the courtyard. Music, place you can sit and eat. Second ring is in the bar area, and you are in the middle of this ring. And in this ring, we are going to have 12 performances. Each of the performers are going to take one word from the lexicon of Marx and define it in their own special way. I'm delighted you're all here, and let us begin with the Dictionary of Marx.
I never thought I'd be a poet. I always thought I'd star in Broadway musicals. But I got tired of playing Chino from West Side Story. So I decided to go into something more lucrative, like poetry. Casting directors would wave their blonde arms into my face, stare at me and asked if I knew jiu-jitsu, as if this were jiu-jitsu. They would ask me where I was from, and it would depend on what I was auditioning for. If it was West Side Story, I'd be Puerto Rican. If it was Miss Saigon, I'd be whatever. Then I figured out it depends on what season of the year it is. Because in spring I get the Chinese parts, in June the South Asian parts, and by August I'd be up for The Color Purple, the musical. I started to write poetry because I was going through a quarter-life crisis. I was dating this older guy named Don, and he said, "Regie, you're not writing about us, are you?" And I said, "No, Don, I'm not. But I am writing a fiction piece about dating an older guy. The chapter's called Don. But I spell it with 2 N's. And he says, "Regie, you're crazy. I can't go out with you." And I said, "I can't help it, Don. You bring out the writer in me." See, Don is one of those guys who are attracted to me. They're usually anthropologists. Because they're into my bone structure. So I'll be at a bar and this guy will stare at me like I'm on the cover of National Geographic. And he'll like walk over to me and he'll say, "Could I tell you something? You remind me of an Aztec priest." Well, that gets me excited. Let's strip naked and dance to Montezuma. Are you Cortez? And he'll stare at me and he'll say, "Where are you from? Baltimore?" Oh, no, you know what I mean. Where are you really from? See it slowly. Baltimore, Maryland. We were the first Filipino family to move into southern Maryland. It was so long ago we came in on Carabao. I called her entrance the Little Nipa Hut on the prairie. As soon as we moved into our new home, my mom, who is super Catholic, a hypochondriac, and a nurse, started making the sign of the cross with Lysol. I have 2 sisters named Faith and Charity. My name is Regie. There is no hope in the family. Regie means king, but my parents didn't know they got a queen. As soon as my poetry came out, I came out. It's one thing to be straight acting, but when I'm writing, I can't lie. I have passed for Tibetan in Manhattan, Peruvian in Queens, Bombay in my father's barrios of Pangasinan, Japanese at the Black Pride Parade. I have been every Lyft driver 6 degrees of separation. And that guy on Lost. As many times as I've been mistaken, I have had my own missteps. My poetry has been called out for being gender conformative and biphobic. But I struggle to do the work, to dialogue and listen, but sometimes I just want to throw my arms in a world that is laser-eyed and furious. The drama teacher wants to produce a female version of Hamlet to a middle school class that could barely stand in a circle. Regie, before you leave, I'd like to pick your brain. Now, when a non-person of color tells me that they want to pick my brain, it brings out the Lapu-Lapu Magellan warrior in me. Yes, I say. Oh, Regie, I need ways of teaching gender and sexuality to the class. Can you find me exercises on doing that? It's just that I know you're in that world, you know, part of that world. That world? What world? The Little Mermaids? It's our world, and if we were producing an Asian version of Cinderella, you'd probably want me to fetch a pumpkin-colored rickshaw and a glass tie cheese slipper. Oh, let me be your gay cis-male Pocahontas as I run through all the colors of the wind to tell you what it's like to be a woman in a male role. After the last election, I host a queer storytelling show in Birmingham, Alabama. I asked the performers, well, how do you feel about the results? And they say, well, we're kind of glad this happened. I'm thinking, what? I can hear the Hitchcock string strike the back of my neck. See, Regie, what you fear is what we've been living with on a daily basis. And I think about what I learned from my theater company. People cast your vote for people who are closer to them, not people who are further away. The government asks me to check one if I want money. I say, how could you ask me to be one race? I stand proudly before you, a fierce Filipino who knows how to belt hard gospel songs played to African drums at a Catholic mass, and loving the music to suffering beats and lashes from men's eyes in the capital streets. Southeast DC with its sleepy crime, my mother nursed patients from 7 to 9, patients gray from the railroad riding past civil rights. I walked their tracks when I entertained them at the chapel and made their canes pillars of percussion to my heavy gospel. My comedy out loud, laughing about our shared stolen experiences of the South. Would it surprise you if I told you my blood was delivered from north of Portuguese vessels who gave me spiritual stones in return in my eyes, my father's name when they conquered the Pacific Isles. My hair is black and thick as negrito, growing abundant as sampaguita, flowers defying civilization like Filipino pygmies that dance in the mountain. I have danced jigs with Jim Crow, shuffled my hips to the sonic guitar of Clapton and Hendrix, waltzed with dead lovers, skipped to bamboo sticks, ballet kabuki and mime katakali, ribadirchi the rumba and tapped in Pan Alley. You want me to dance the Bhagavad Gita on a box too small for a Thumbelina thin diva? I'll check other.
I was lucky enough to take some classes with some professors that exposed me to some of Marx's work, and I, like Matt, I found some things in it that I didn't find anywhere else. There were things that he was talking about in ways that he was approaching problems that I hadn't seen in other thinkers, and that really led me to want to learn more.
So I'm presenting on the concept of history. So Marx says, we know only a single science, the science of history. One can look at history from two sides and divide it into the history of nature and the history of men. The two sides, however, are inseparable. The history of nature and the history of men are dependent on each other so long as men exist. So the notion of history is central in Marx's theory because it invokes themes of process, development, and change. The specifically historical, that is, dynamic and human-made nature of existence is what permits us to imagine the possibility of a different world. It offers insight into how we might bring that world about by allowing us to determine how it is that we as a species have already, even unwittingly, produced the world that we are in. For Marx, history is the concept that unites all forms of being, that's capital B, being, everything in existence, both the natural and the social. It is customary to divide natural science, that is, areas like physics and biology and chemistry, from the social sciences like psychology, sociology, anthropology, and so on. But Marx counters that in so doing, we distort our understanding of both. The social world is produced in circumstances continuously transformed by human social activity through time. So Marx's theory goes by a number of names. Call it communism, call it historical materialism or dialectical materialism. Marx himself and his collaborator Friedrich Engels refer to it as the materialist conception of history. So the quote that you see is one of the ways that they defined what it meant to talk about a materialist conception of history. So they wrote, "The first premise of all human history is, of course, the existence of living human individuals. Thus, the first fact to be established is the physical organization of these individuals and their consequent relation to the rest of nature. The writing of history must always set out from these natural bases and their modification in the course of history through the action of men and women and non-binary people and human beings of all kinds," right? We can add. So here Marx distinguishes his own method from those of economists and philosophers who premise their theories on an idealized human abstraction. That is, this idea of an isolated, self-sufficient, competitive individual. To truly understand the world we're in and how that world has come about, we must take up what Marx calls concrete or empirical premises, and these are the human beings themselves, not how they appear in our imagination. Here too, real history requires us to unite natural and social science to understand human social development within the natural conditions in which it has arisen. Marx had a number of important philosophical influences, and perhaps chief among them, or arguably chief among them, was the German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel. So Hegel developed a system of dialectical idealism. Dialectics is the idea that history is propelled forward by productive antagonisms. For Hegel, these were antagonisms between conflicting ideas, hence dialectical idealism. What Marx took from Hegel was this notion of progress in history, driven by conflict, and leading to the full expression of an essence or nature that for now appears only partial or hidden. So what I'm showing you here is a few remarks from Hegel on the nature of history. So Hegel says, history is the process whereby the spirit discovers itself in its own concept. So again, you can see the idealism in Hegel, the emphasis on the conceptual, the spiritual, the psychological. And Hegel goes on to write, if we seek to understand history and to comprehend it by means of philosophy, the most important and distinctive feature of the whole undertaking, indeed its very essence, is that we should discover and recognize this idea of transition. So Marx took over this idea of transition, of progress, of development, of change that's driven forward by contradictions and oppositions. However, Marx himself said of his relationship to Hegel, with him, dialectics is standing on its head. It must be turned right side up again if you would discover the rational kernel within the mystical shell. And perhaps most famously, Marx writes at the beginning of the Communist Manifesto that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle, right? So again, we get this emphasis on material factors, conflicts among human beings, but taking over some of the important themes from Hegel. So Marx thought of the world that we live in as, in fact, a kind of prehistory. He described class society as a prehistory of human beings. Marx thought that capitalism created not only class conflict, but also the means for overcoming this conflict and the major destructive social antagonisms along with it. So here we have Marx writing, "Mankind inevitably sets itself only such tasks as it is able to solve, since closer examination will always show that the problem itself arises only when the material conditions for its solution are already present or at least in the course of formation. The bourgeois mode of production is the last antagonistic form of the social process of production. But the productive forces developing within bourgeois society create also the material conditions for a solution of this antagonism. The prehistory of human society accordingly closes with this social formation." So Marx thought only once this work of overcoming class conflict was accomplished and human beings lived without oppression and exploitation could a truly human history begin. So I'll leave you with this last thought, which is that on Marx's 200th birthday, what a better gift to give him than for all of us to set ourselves to the noble task of ushering that truly human history in. Thank you very much.
I realize I have a lot to learn, and I'm so happy that the Institute is providing this opportunity. I had no idea it was the 200th birthday.
Eyes, ears, nose, mouth, senses, shoulders, elbow, wrist, fingers, torso, pelvis, legs, soul, soul, my mind, body. Masculine, feminine, to be human. I pledge allegiance to that of the United and to the Republic for which it one nation under with liberty and justice for. But I do pledge honesty. I pledge to be a good son, nephew, uncle, godfather. I pledge to be full of value and free of judgment. I pledge to listen. I pledge to live a balanced life, to breathe. I pledge to call home once a week. Okay, every other week. In all honesty, as often as I can. I pledge to keep the golden rule that my grandmother taught me, which is to treat others the way you want to be treated. I pledge to recycle paper, plastic, aluminum. I pledge to dance. I pledge to honor, respect this body. I pledge to wear clothes in public places. So I ask you, what do you pledge? As citizens of this place where you live, concerned citizens where you live, what things do you pledge? Really? So I'm going to give you a moment to talk to each other. And the person next to you, just talk and just tell them what you pledge in this bountiful life that you live. Clear? And go. the people. We pledge so many things. In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
I think people are enjoying it a lot. It's been very diverse in the performances, so there's different reactions. It's very energetic. There's a good vibe around here, so this has been very good.
We're just kind of all processing it and taking it in and seeing how to apply it to the things we know about Marx. So it's great to be here, and it's sold out. There's a lot of our friends here as well, so this is great.
Feet. What do I need them for if I have wings to fly? Ruins. Are you leaving? No. Broken wings. Everything exists and moves under only one law. Life. I feel immense joy in living. Feet. Yes. What do I need them for if I have wings to fly?
Porque la necesito y tengo alas para volar. Ruinas.
Are you leaving?
¿Te vas?
No.
No.
Broken wings. Everything exists and moves under only one law. Life. I feel immense joy of living. I feel uneasy about my painting. Above all, I want to transform it into something useful for the revolution. I'm not a worker, but a craftswoman, an unconditional ally to the communist revolutionary movement. Engels, Marx, united in blood to me. Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Moon, Sun, me. Revolution is the harmony of form and color. So, private property. I want to talk about it because I own shit. Okay? But also because I'm Puerto Rican. And if you've been watching the news at all, you know that Puerto Rico is dealing with a loss of a ton of private property, which at this point is probably going to go into the hands of people who can afford to buy that lost private property. Okay? So I'm going to read 3 poems. And I was trying to figure out if, you know, with Marx Puerto Rican, you know, he might talk about migration. Because a lot of folks left the island because they needed to get more shit. Okay? And were unhappy with the stuff they had. Okay? And that was made that way because of a history of colonization and so on and so forth. You know. Alright? So let's see if we can do it some justice. Private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. I have made this and this is mine. Can you see the calluses on my fingers, skin toughened by the practice of making, the scars etched into the skin from mistakes made in the learning? the stoop in the back that comes from leaning into repetition. I have made this and this is mine. I've plowed the field and eaten from the harvest, have run the loom and worn the clothing made from the wool, have built the home and rested within its walls. I've even carved the cane I lean on. This is what has already been taken. The dance of the maker who understands the steps and has worked them into what is necessary. Dancing to the song built of notes that are not forced on others or sung for the benefit of an audience that does not understand how the music is made. It was replaced. The song changed into the hum of machines that fill rooms where hands stitch the clothing that will drape the backs of women whose high heels with click-clack through homes that echo the absence of people to fill them. While those who sweat in the heat of a day's labor will walk home to a crowd that will know only the desire for space or the silk that their hands have stitched. A house may be large or small, as long as the neighboring houses are likewise small. But let there arise next to the little house a palace, and the little house shrinks to a hut. The little house makes it clear that its inmate has no social position at all to maintain. So things you should know: a jíbaro is a campesino, somebody who lives in the mountainside in Puerto Rico. A pitirre is a small little bird with a lot of fight. And kikiriki is what the sound the rooster makes in Spanish. The jíbaro builds his home on a mountainside. The flamboyant adds its red to the view. The space between the slats allows the music of the pitirre's call to enter the home and adds to the kikiriki of the rooster that struts his ownership of morning. The jíbaro walks the mountain, sees that it is beautiful, and says, "This is enough." The jíbaro's children are born into this wooden house, into this red flowering, into this chorus of bird calls, into this morning that were built by the jíbaro's labor, and this is enough. In town, the cement houses sit solid and seem untouched by the wind that sometimes push against the wooden exterior of the jíbaro's mountainside home. He places his feet upon the cold surface of a floor that will not dirty them. Wanting. He touches the roughness of walls that leave no room for wind or rain or the hillside song to enter. Desiring. This is better, he says, as he looks to the left and to the right and compares the walls and the roofs and the floors, but does not listen for the music that is missing. This is better, he says. This will be enough. The jíbaro's children grow, knowing only that which the windows of a cement home placed at the end of a dead-end street will allow in. Knowing only that which, once I get the paper changed, is imported into the home. Not pulled from the earth around it or picked from the trees that surround it. They have no ties to this. They are not rooted here. They leave. Jump on planes and boats, find their way away from what is enough. They have seen the pictures of the city where the rooftops offer a place to stand in your finery and be sent home more than you were when seated on the balcón of the cement house that was enough for mama and papa. They work, hands learning only the movement necessary to produce the things they cannot afford, making only enough to consume what they are told is beautiful, what they are told they need to own, to be more than the wooden house or the cement house. They buy, wanting to be more. They want more, to be more, to be this. They need more than their neighbor to the left or to the right. This becomes a song they dance to, but even though they purchase the notes, they don't own the music. So they half mambo the work and make the music that others compose, off-key renditions of standards that people will consume blind. Life becomes a gathering of the unnecessary. A wanting that does not speak of need, but leaves everyone needing, except for those who control the making, control the work of Maria and Jose and Carlos and Juana, those whose hands do not know the repetition of a task that produces, those who own the stitches Maria's hands place evenly across a garment, those who own the pounding of the hammer Jose wields as he places each nail into the boards that support the home he will never live in. These belong to them, and they will gather what is produced, and it will be theirs. For those members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. Rewind. Let's go back to the wooden house. Remember when that was enough? When the eye of the jíbaro caught only the color of the flamboyant. Remember when the rooster was the only one who claimed the ownership of morning? Rewind. Let's go back. Imagine a different song. Make the dance one where everybody can learn the steps. The music one that each of the jíbaro's children contributes a note to, where they see the beauty in each other's movements, where what is mine and what is yours and what is theirs blends into a melody that we all take time to listen to, and forces us into a dance that makes want unneeded and makes what is needed a thing that is never wanted for. And I'm going to close this out with two poems. So, Puerto Ricans in New York had a habit. They would go up to the rooftop, they would dress up in their best gear, and they would take photographs, stuff them in an envelope, put a 3-cent stamp on that bad boy, and send it back to the island, right? Now, when it got back to the island, their folks would get it and they'd be like, damn, that looks good. I want to go too. So this is called 3-cent version. And it's about the folks sending the pictures back. Version 1, fur-collared diosa from Ponce. This is the 3-cent version of me. 3 cents ain't easy to come by. And it doesn't include the price of the photo, the envelope, or the people. Pero val carajo, it's worth it. Since I get to send you a picture of who I want you to see me at. Out here in Los Nueva Yorkers, I am the fur-collared diosa from Ponce. I take this picture on the tar of a rooftop that the sun heats to the point where it reminds me of home. But this ain't home. Tomorrow, I am back to the woman you don't ever get to see. The callous fingered seamstress from La 116, whose fingers have become accustomed to the sensation of silk she can't afford to sew into her own box. 3-cent version 2. Man with his hat tipped just right. This is a 3-cent version of me. Hat tipped just right, black shoes fading into the black of tar that lines a beach. Waters never seem to find their way to. From up here, I can view the city and become who I want you to see. Tomorrow, you will be tempted, like 1,000 others, to ride the marine tiger and come and be the me I send via airmail. Tomorrow, I go back to me, the boot black, who snaps the rhythm of a mambo play palladium style with my cloth against shoe leather until it is buffed to a high shine and ready to enter the spaces I am never welcome. So welcome to the tar beaches and the laborer's hands and a life where the 3-cent versions of a people fly home the lies of a living less beautiful than the man in the hat that is tipped just right, or the woman with the fur collar wrapped around her.
1649 to St. George's Hill. The ragged band they called the Diggers came to show the people's will. Defied the landlord, they defied the laws. They were the dispossessed, reclaiming what was theirs. We come in peace, they say, to dig and sow. Come to work the land in common and to make the race ground grow. This earth divided, we will make whole. So it will be a common treasury for all. The sin of property we do disdain. No man has any right to buy and sell the earth for private gain. By theft and murder they took the land. Now everywhere the wars spring up at their command. They make laws to chain us well. Clergy dazzle us with heaven, but they damn us into hell. We will not worship the God they serve, the God of greed who feeds the rich while poor men starve. We work, we eat together, we need no swords. We'll not bow to the masters or pay rent to the lords. We are free, though we are poor. You diggers all stand up for glory, stand up now. Step, the longest march can be won. Many stones can form an arch. Singly none, and by union one we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill. Singly none. From the men of property, the orders came. They sent the hired guns and troopers to wipe out the diggers' claim. Tear down their cottages, destroy their corn. They were dispersed, but still the vision lingers on. You poor take courage, you rich take care. This earth was made a common treasury for everyone to share. All things in common, all people one. We come in peace, the orders came to cut them down. I call that song The Diggers. The real name is The World Turned Upside Down. It's a little long for a song title, I think. But I didn't write the song, Leon Rosselson did, and that's what he calls it. It reminds us that we're all standing on the shoulders of those who came before us in this long struggle for justice and for peace. This next song is written by John Hancock. He was a founder of the Southern Tenants Farmers Union. And this song is called Mean Things Happening in This Land. It's a title to a book about that union written by H.L. Mitchell. Things happening in this land at your party. There are mean things happening in this land where the union's going on and the union's going strong. There are mean things happening in this land where the planters throw the people off of their land, where many years they'd spent in the cold, hard winter time. You know we had to live in tents. are mean things happening in this land. There are mean things happening in this land. Too much cotton in our sacks, yeah, but we have none on our backs. There are mean things happening in this land. Well, there are mean things happening in this land. There are mean things happening in this land. There's too much groceries on the shelf, yeah, but we have none for ourselves. There are mean things happening in this land. This next song is on the newest record by my band, the Uehleiners. It is one of 2 covers. It's a collection of 10 songs, 8 new originals, 2 covers, all songs that have something to say about the world around us. This was written by Sarah Ogan Gunning, wife of a coal miner in Harlan County, Kentucky in the early 1940s. It's called Coal Miners. And you can hear in the lyrics that she has something to say about capitalism. Come on, you coal miners, wherever you may be, listen to the story I relate to thee. My name is nothing extra, truth to you I'll tell. I am a coal miner, and I sure wish you well. I was born in old Kentucky in a coal camp, born and bred. I know about old beans, bulldog gravy, and cornbread. Know how the miners work and slave in the coal mines every day. For $1 in the company store, for that is all they pay. Well, mining is the most dangerous work in our land today. Plenty of dirty slaving work, very little pay. Miners, won't you wake up, open your eyes and see what this dirty capitalist system has done to you and me. Dear miners, they will slave you till you can't work no more. What do you get for your labor? $1 in the company store. Tumble down shack to live in, rain pouring through the time. You have to pay the company rent, the payments, they never stop. They take our very lifeblood, take our children's lives, take fathers from their children, husbands from their wives. Miners, won't you organize wherever you may be, and make this a land of freedom for workers like you and me. Well, I am a coal miner, sure I wish you well. Let's sink this capitalist system to the darkest pits of hell. Yeah, well, I told you she had something to say about capitalism. It's one of my favorite tracks on the new record. New record, by the way, is called Sweet Lorraine, named for Lorain, Ohio, the city where my story starts. And the title track is sort of well, not semi, it is autobiographical. out to cheat us. Money speaks for money, the devil for his own. Who comes to speak for the skin and the bone? What a comfort to the widow, a light to the child. There is power in a union. There is power in a sing on this song. It's a Joe Hill song. It's called The Preacher and the Slave. I'm guessing you've heard it. It's one of his more popular songs. Long hair preachers come out every night, trying to tell you what's wrong and what's right. By and by, in that glorious land in the sky, work and pray, live on hay. You'll get high in the sky when you die. Try that again. You will leave by and by, in that glorious land in the sky, work and pray, live on hay. Get high in the sky when you die. I heard some, that's a loud right. I was going to say I heard some good harmonies, but now I heard the part of the real lyric. Thank you for that. That is a lie. And in the last verse, you'll learn why and how. But I heard some good harmonies, but as you know, Pete Seeger used to say, a lot of people were sort of exercising their academic objectivity and not singing. And yeah, I was traumatized as a young boy when my parents took me to a Pete Seeger concert and I wasn't singing along, and he pointed right at me and said, "Hey, you're not singing." I don't know. So I invite you to sing. Will the Starvation Army band play? They sing, they clap and they pray when they get all your corn on the drum. They tell you that you're on the bum. Here we go. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get high in the sky when you die. That's a lie. Will you work hard through struggle and strife? Try to get something good in this life. You're a sinner and a bad one, they tell. When you die, you will surely go to hell. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get high in the sky when you die. That's a lie. The working folk of all countries unite. Hand in hand for freedom we'll fight. When this earth and its wealth we have gained, to the grafters we'll sing this refrain. Now this last verse a little different. You will eat by and by when you learn how to cook and to fry. When you learn how to cook and to fry. Chop some wood, it'll do you good, Then you'll get the sweet by and by. That's no lie.
In the first place, I didn't really have any expectations when I come here, and I'm really positively surprised. I really like the acts. It's really my kind of thing that I usually go to, and I'm really glad that Goethe does these kind of things, and I got the feeling it attracts like a lot of people from all age groups, which I really like.
Here in America, your prisons are crowded. Who is in them? The poor. Some of them have committed violent and terrible crimes. Most of them are burglars, thieves, robbers, sellers of drugs. They believe in free enterprise. They do what the capitalists do, but on a much smaller scale. Do you know what Engels and I wrote about prisons? Rather than punishing individuals for their crimes, we should destroy the social conditions which engender crime and give to each individual the scope which he needs in society in order to develop his life. Oh yes, we spoke of a dictatorship of the proletariat, not of a party, of a central committee, not a dictatorship of one man. No, we spoke of a temporary dictatorship of the working class. The mass of the people would take over the state and govern in the interests of all until the state itself would become unnecessary and gradually disappear. Bakunin, of course, disagreed. He said, oh, no, bless you. He said that a state, even a workers' state, if it has an army, police, prisons, will become a tyranny. But he loved to argue with me, sir. So you know about him. Bakunin the anarchist? That laugh is the best birthday gift you could give. For those who don't know, if a novelist invented such a character, you would say, the existence of such a person is not possible. To say that Bakunin and I did not get along is a great understatement. Listen to what he said at the time Engels and I were in Brussels writing the manifesto. Marx and Engels, especially Marx, are ingrained bourgeois. We were ingrained bourgeois. Of course, compared with Bakunin, everyone was bourgeois because Bakunin chose to live like a pig. If you did not live like a pig, if you had a roof over your head, if you had a piano in your sitting room, if you enjoyed some fresh bread and wine, you were bourgeois. I grant the man courage. He was imprisoned, sent to Siberia, escaped, wandered the world, trying to foment revolution everywhere. He wanted to create an anarchist society, but the only anarchism he ever succeeded in establishing was in his head. He tried to start an uprising in Bologna and almost killed himself with his own revolver. His revolutions failed everywhere, but he was like a man whose failure with women only spurs him on to more. Did you ever see a photograph of Bakunin? A giant, Jesus Christ, a giant of a man. A bald head. You can take that. Pass it, I'm sorry. Bald head, which he covered with a little gray cap, massive beard, ferocious expression. He had no teeth. Scurvy. Oh, the result of his prison diet. He seemed to live not in this world, but in some world of his imagination. He was oblivious to money. When he had it, he gave it away. When he didn't have it, he borrowed with no thought of returning it. He had no home, or you might say the world was his home. He would arrive at a comrade's house and announce, I'm here. Where do I sleep and what is there to eat? In an hour, he was more at home than his hosts. Oh, there was that time in London. We were having dinner, and Bakunin burst in. Didn't bother to knock. It was his habit to arrive at dinner time. We were surprised. We thought he was in Italy. Whenever we heard of him, he was in some far-off country organizing a revolution. Well, he nearly knocked the door off its hinges, came in, looked around, smiled his toothless smile, and said, "Good evening, comrade." And without waiting for a response, he sat down at the table and began devouring sausage and meat in enormous chunks, stuffing in cheese too, and glass after glass of the brandy. I said to him, "Mikhail, try the wine. We have plenty of that. Brandy is expensive." He drank some wine, spit it right out. Absolutely tasteless. Brandy helps you think more clearly. He then began his usual performance, preaching, arguing, ordering, shouting, exhorting. Ah! I was furious, but it was Jenny who spoke up. She said, "Mikhail, stop. You're consuming all the oxygen in the room." But he just roared with laughter and went on. Bakunin's head was full of anarchist garbage, romantic, utopian nonsense, and I wanted to expel him from the International. Jenny thought this was ridiculous. "Why," she said, "do revolutionary groups with only 6 members threaten someone with expulsion?" Well, all right, I know. He was with us a week. Once, we stayed up the whole night drinking and arguing and drinking some more until neither of us could walk. In fact, I fell asleep in the midst of one of Bakunin's perorations, and he shook me until I woke up saying, "I haven't finished my bite." It was that glorious time in the winter of 1871 when the Commune had taken power in Paris. Yes, the Paris Commune. Bakunin leaped with his full bulk into that revolution. The French understood him. They had a saying. "On the first day of a revolution, Bakunin is a treasure. On the second day, he should be shot." Do you know about that magnificent episode in human history? The Paris Commune. The story starts with stupidity. I am speaking of Napoleon III, the nephew of Bonaparte. He was a buffoon, a stage actor, smiling to the crowd while 16 million French peasants lived in blind, dark hovels, their children dying of starvation. But because he kept a legislature, because people voted, it was thought they had a democracy. A common mistake. Bonaparte wanted glory, so he made the mistake of attacking Bismarck's armies. But he was quickly defeated, whereupon the victorious German troops marched into Paris and were greeted by something more devastating than guns. Silence. They found the statues of Paris draped in black, an immense, invisible, silent resistance. They did the wise thing. They paraded through the Arc de Triomphe and quickly departed. And the old French order, the Republic, liberals they called themselves, they did not dare come into Paris. They were trembling with fear because with the Germans gone, Paris was now taken over by the workers, the housewives, the clerks, the intellectuals, the armed citizens. The people of Paris formed not a government, but something more glorious, something governments everywhere fear. A commune, the collective energy of the people. It was the Commune de Paris. People meeting all over the city, 24 hours a day, in knots of 3 and 4, making decisions together. All the while, the city was encircled by the French army, threatening to invade at any moment. Paris became the first free city of the world, the first enclave of liberty in a world of tyranny. I said to Bakunin, you want to know what I mean by a dictatorship of the proletariat? Look at the Commune of Paris. That is true democracy. Not the democracy of England or America, where elections are circuses with people voting for one or another guardian of the old order, where, whichever candidate wins, the rich go on ruling the country. The Commune of Paris. It lived only a few months, but it was the first legislative body in history to represent the poor. Its laws were for them. It abolished their debts, postponed their rents, forced the pawn shops to return their most needed possessions. They refused to take salaries higher than the workers. They lowered the hours of the bakers and planned how to give free admission to the theater to everyone. The great Courbet himself, whose paintings had stunned Europe, presided over the Federation of Artists. They reopened the museums, set up a commission for the education of women. Something unheard of. Education for women. They took advantage of the latest in science, the lighter-than-air balloon, and they launched one out of Paris to soar over the countryside, dropping printed papers for the peasants with a simple, powerful message. The same message that should be dropped to working people everywhere in the world. Our interests are the same. The Commune declared the purpose of the schools: to teach children to love and respect their fellow creatures. I have read your endless discussions of education. It's such nonsense. They teach everything needed to succeed in a capitalist world, but do they teach the young to struggle for justice? The communards understood the importance of that. They educated not only by their words, but by their acts. They destroyed the guillotine, that symbol of tyranny, even revolutionary tyranny. Then, wearing red scarves, carrying a huge red banner, the buildings festooned in sheets of red silk, they gathered around the Vendôme column, symbol of military power, a huge statue surmounted by the bronze head of Napoleon Bonaparte. A pulley was attached to the head. A capstan turned and the head crashed to the ground. People climbed on the ruins. A red flag now floated from the pedestal. Now it was the pedestal not of one country, but of the human race. And the men and women watching wept with joy. Yes, that was the Commune of Paris. The streets were always full, discussion going on everywhere. People shared things, they seemed to smile more. Kindness ruled. The streets were safe, without police of any kind. Yes, yes, that was socialism. But of course, that example, the example of the Commune, could not be allowed. So, the armies of the Republic marched into Paris and commenced a slaughter. The leaders of the Commune were taken to Père Lachaise cemetery, put against a stone wall, and shot. Altogether, 30,000 were killed. The Commune was crushed by wolves and swine. But it was the most glorious achievement of our time.
People seem to be responding to them more from their heart. So I think it's interesting to see how these words that really form the foundation of Marxism have developed their own meanings within modern society. But I think people like the task, and they like to be able to contribute, even if they're not performers. They like to be able to contribute to the whole night. So I think it's a fun exercise.
They feed they line out of burlap sacks, out of bearing butter, out of black bean and wet slate bread, out of the acids of rage, the candor of tar, out of creosote, gasoline, drive shafts, wooden dollies, they lie and grow. Out of the gray hills of industrial barns, out of rain, out of bus ride West Virginia to kiss my ass, out of buried aunties, mothers hardening like pounded stumps, out of the bones need to sharpen and the muscles to stretch. They lie and grow, 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 lie and grow.
Earth is eating trees, fence posts, gutted cars. Earth is calling in her little ones. Come home, come home. From pig balls, from the ferocity of pig driven into holiness, from the furred ear and the full jowl comes the repose of the hung belly. From the purpose, they lie and grow. From the sweet glues of the trotters come the sweet kinks of the fist. From the full flower of the hams, the thorax of caves. From bow down, come rise up, come they lion. From the reeds of shovels, from the grained arm that pulls the hands, they lie and grow. They lie and grow. They lie and grow from my 5 arms and all my hands, from all my white sins forgiven, from my car passing under the stars. They feed, they lion, from my children inherit, from the oak turned to a wall, they lion, from they sack and they belly opened, and all that was hidden, burning on the oil-stained earth. They feed their lion, and he comes.
friends, comrades, and students. Look at all these Marxists. All thought they were doing something to create socialism. Karl Marx and Rosa Luxemburg, the German socialists. Eugene Debs, Norman Thomas, American socialists. Vladimir, Leon, and Joe, Soviet socialists. Well, Russian, but he was from Georgia. Mao and Ho, East Asian socialists. Angela and Che, North American socialists. And Kim, Trump's new best friend, and Slavoj Žižek, current socialists. They all thought they were doing something to create socialism. They were all Marxists. But you know who rarely used the S word? And even once said he wasn't really a Marxist? This guy. How could that be? Marx spent his whole adult life analyzing capitalism, sometimes brilliantly. He understood that capitalism was a revolutionary system, driven by the force of the profit motive, and that it would take over the whole damn world, as it has. He also understood that making a profit depended, in large part, on exploiting the labor of the people who did most of the work. Sometimes Marx got the system entirely wrong, though. Capitalism cannot reform itself. The working class will overthrow it. Democracy is nothing but a tool of the bourgeoisie. Too often Marx saw the world he wanted to see, not the world as it actually was, and the world as it actually is. But Marx didn't spend a lot of time writing about socialism. He did, however, spend a lot of time criticizing people who called themselves socialists and were wrong. Look at the Communist Manifesto, that eloquent, often prophetic document. That's the only thing Marx wrote, with a lot of help from his good friend and benefactor, Fred Engels, that most people ever read. There you'll find several barred pages about what Marx called feudal socialism, petty bourgeois socialism, German or true socialism, conservative or bourgeois socialism, and critical utopian socialism. You like that one a little more than the others. Marx scorned all of these, though, as completely or mostly wrong-headed, foolishly utopian, or just plain absurd notions about what a good society was going to look like. Did Marx impart any words of wisdom about what, if you excuse the word brand of socialism, he favored? Not really. A few stray lines like, from each according to his ability, each according to his need, and a dictatorship of the proletariat. Not enough to really fit on a banner in a May Day parade, much less a blueprint for a future society he thought would inevitably come about. So why, Karl? Why all this silence about the end result you yearn for, but would never see? The primary reason is Marx believed in his own theory of how change came about. He called it historical materialism. A new society emerges from the economic and social contradictions of the old one. But you can't predict in advance what that new society will look like. That's up to a history that hasn't happened yet. If you want to know the future, spend $20 at a palm reader. Maybe you'll learn, maybe you won't. Marx did predict capitalism would fall prey to its contradictions, just as slavery had, just as feudalism had. So he was quite sure that capitalism would die, but he couldn't and wouldn't say what its hard-driving, strong-armed gravediggers were put in its place. Now for Marxists, this was both a good thing and a problem. Marx had left his followers to define socialism almost any way they liked, as long as the old ruling class was overthrown and workers had a pretty big part in the overthrow. But political parties need platforms, and Marx did not supply one. So socialists had to do it for themselves. The result, you got a huge variety of socialists, like the ones I showed you, who often despised each other and sometimes went to war with each other. You had the reformist social democrats of parties in Western and Central Europe. You had the authoritarian socialism of the original Bolsheviks and the Castro brothers. You had the tyrannical socialism of Stalin and Mao. You had the dynastic socialism of the Kim family in North Korea. And perhaps worse, the genocidal socialism of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. What would Marx have thought of all these socialisms? It's hard to say, though not completely impossible. He surely didn't think a dictatorship of the proletariat meant brutally repressing anyone not in the working class, or who disagreed with what the ruling party said. Marx even mused till the end of his life that a peaceful transition to socialism might take place in nations where workers could vote, countries like the Netherlands, Great Britain, and the USA. And that brings us up to the present. Now, if you go by opinion polls, socialism is more popular now than it's ever been in American history. More millennials say they favor socialism than capitalism. Democratic Socialist America, anybody a member of Democratic Socialist America, DSA, has increased its membership 500% over the last 2 years. Hundreds of people all over the country who proudly call themselves socialists are running for office. A few of them have gotten elected, one in Virginia. But the one American socialist whose name we all know defines the word socialism in ways none of those people whose faces I threw up on the screen would agree with, and Marx wouldn't either. Bernie says, in the one speech he gave about defining socialism during the campaign at my university, Georgetown, he said, if I'm a socialist, So was Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he signed the Social Security Act and the National Labor Relations Act. I'm a socialist, so was Lyndon Baines Johnson when he signed Medicare and the Civil Rights Act. So was Martin Luther King Jr. when he marched for interracial unions and jobs for everyone and an end to poverty. According to Bernie, socialism is a cherished American tradition. Nothing to be afraid of. Why, two of these guys, King and Roosevelt, even have monuments near them all. The other guy might too if he had decided to spend billions of dollars and dispatch 500,000 troops to kill socialists in Vietnam. Now don't get me wrong, I much prefer the kind of socialism that Bernie's selling to any of the others. Although in Europe they wouldn't call it socialism, they'd call it social democracy. And if it did come about in the United States, it would probably make capitalism work better for more people than convince them to actually abolish it. Because that's what happened in Europe. But my favorite socialist is that long-dead American Marxist who defined the good society and his own role of bringing it about in as straightforward and humane a way as anyone ever has. This guy. Exactly 100 years ago this fall, we heard a song about this during the break, Eugene Debs was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the horrible, dastardly, awful crime of giving an anti-war speech at a socialist picnic in Canton, Ohio. Before Debs was shipped off to the penitentiary, the judge allowed him to say a few parting words. And this is how he began. If you want to say it along with me, I'm not Pete Seeger, but please do. Years ago, I recognized my kinship with all living beings. I made up my mind that I was not one bit better than the meanest on earth. I said then, and I say now, that while there's a lower class, I am in it. While there's a criminal element, I am of it. And while there's a soul in prison, I am not free. I think that's what Marx and Engels were getting at when they wrote in the manifesto, the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. That's the best alternative I know to the enduring exploitation of much of humanity. Even as 2 billion of us are on Facebook and are addicted to these little computers we carry around in our pockets. Don't just tweet. Organize!
The night of November 10th, 2016 in Washington, D.C. Bleary-eyed and shuffling, a dozen of my closest friends gather in the living room of a neighbor. We've come to mourn or to do what? We're not sure exactly. Maybe just be together. One friend weeps aloud as she worries what a Trump presidency will mean for her undocumented parents. Another friend talks about how the last 2 generations of her family have had to flee to seek refuge from war and colonization. And suddenly, many of us nod, our eyes widening as we too realize, if we stay here in the United States for the duration of this regime and our lives, we'll break the pattern of generations who've immigrated or been forced out in exile. In that room, every single one of my friends has a parent or grandparent from Cuba, China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Poland, Puerto Rico, the Soviet Union, or Mexico. This realization is both terrifying and empowering. Our ancestors lived through the darkest years of the 20th century, levels of violence across the globe that my generation has yet to see. Our huddled circle is happening in America precisely because of forced relocations that came before. Our very existence owed to stories of survival, hopelessness, and hope. I'm reminded of my great-grandmother, Tanya Ivanovna Shadalova-Rabinovich. Born in 1891, she was no stranger to periods of political upheaval and disillusionment. In a short autobiography she wrote in Russian, Tatiana described her childhood in the Jewish ghettos of what is now Ukraine. Her father was a shoemaker. but she wrote that, quote, there were far more craftsmen of all types than consumers of the craft, so the most unsightly poverty prevailed. Her mother, a laundress, cursed the decrees coming down from the Tsar and the menacing city police who were tasked with maintaining order, but who never prevented anti-Semitic pogroms. Waves of unrest in 1905, when my great-grandmother was 14 years old, unleashed popular sentiment against the Tsar. Tatiana's older brother Ivan got radicalized and participated in a raid of a prestigious printing press, holding the staff hostage and using them to print revolutionary proclamations. His arrest and imprisonment during Tatiana's adolescence ended in his death. Tatiana described her late brother as, quote, a tireless dreamer for a better life. As a teenager, Tatiana supported her local chapter of the Socialist Revolutionary Party and efforts to help political prisoners escape from Tsarist jails. After her first arrest at age 16 years old, Tatiana was sent away for 2 years, but despite threatening interrogations, she contributed to her local socialist activism, distributing pamphlets and recruiting members in her new city. She may even have stored explosives in preparation for violent acts against the monarchy. Another arrest resulted in a 5-year, 4-month sentence of hard labor, which she served in prisons and labor camps across Latvia and Siberia. Still, Tatiana connected with other anarchists and socialists to publish a magazine called Workers' Voice. She finally settled in Moscow with her family, where she joined a society for former political prisoners, helped organize a museum for the history of the revolution, and carried out charitable work for orphans and famine victims. Tatiana lived in service of big, world-changing ideals. Can her story teach us about this political moment? Is her life a lesson in surviving authoritarianism? The problem is, she didn't survive. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels believed that socialism would develop in predictable stages: forming of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, and conquest of political power by the proletariat. There was a supposed science to this. The equation included a dictatorship of the proletariat, a necessary early stage in order to coerce individuals to serve larger society. Eventually, this coercion would stop when the state as a whole would become superfluous and wither away. Marx and Engels' route to utopia has a necessary detour through despotism. But what happens when a man named Joseph Stalin decides that the proletarian state needs to centralize power, total power, under one man? What happens when Joseph Stalin decides that this dictatorship can't yet wither away? Or maybe it never should, because there are dangerous counter-revolutionaries in his midst. The night of January 29th, 1938, bleary-eyed and shuffling, Tatiana struggles to make out the distinct clanking of the elevator. The sounds of neighbors bolting their locks muffles her only evidence. For the past 2 months, black cars with red stripes park in the driveway every single night. And every morning, her building is short 1 or 2 of its inhabitants. Tatiana's heart races. The agents, in their olive uniforms and red-brimmed caps, stomp so loudly it sounds like they could be anywhere in the building. There isn't time to dispose of records, to hide, to move. So she just sits firmly, completely still, watching the front door. How can she be so vigilant and yet with no plan? In my imagination, she straightens her shirt, unclear why and how. How can she even think? A knock. Memo from the deputy chief of the Moscow secret police. Rabinovich Tatiana Shatalova is currently hostile to the Soviet authorities. Based on the above, I recommend Rabinovich Shatalova to be brought to justice under Article 58-10 of the Criminal Code. Memo from the Moscow Division of the Secret Police. Resolved. Rabinovich Shatalova was detained in custody, and the decision is declared concluded. Execution. Utopia, an ambiguous term. Either it's an ideal society that does not yet exist, or it's an ideal society that cannot exist. If it's unrealizable, is the dreamer hopeful, deluded, idealistic, or dangerous? Louis Fisher, an American journalist in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, went from a staunch Stalin supporter to a disillusioned former communist. He wrote, quote, "In one's absorption in an ideal, it is possible to imagine that one generation can be sacrificed for the sake of its descendants. But sacrificing people may become a habit." Fisher was right. In February of 1939, less than 1 year after my great-grandmother's assassination by the state, the secret police chief who authorized her execution was arrested and killed by the very same state. In history books, both secret police henchmen and my great-grandmother are victims of Stalin's purges. But there's one rare fact about my great-grandmother that gets her special mention. See, 30 of Tatiana's activist colleagues were all killed on March 7, 1938, 80 years ago. There are 4 volumes of their recorded interrogations where they were all asked the same exact questions, beginning with, "Are you a member of a counter-revolutionary organization?" Every person answered no at first, but beatings and threats forced them to concede and to testify against their friends. In these official documents, 4 people, all women, have asterisks next to their names. Raisa Ganushkina, Sofia Meshkovskaya, Ina Psaltereva-Rayman, and Tatiana Shatalova. Next to these names is written, "Не признала себе виновной," never admitted guilt. In the transcript, Tatiana says over and over again, "No, no, no." She never conceded. She fought for this new world, and although she would go down with it, she never let go of her dignity. In my imagination, she looks her interrogators right in the eye when she denies their made-up accusations, because she knows this is not socialism, this is fascism.